Hello, and welcome to the 741 channel. I've got something on my mind that I wanted to kind of run by you guys. And rather than sit in the shack, I figured I'd take you guys for a walk with me and we'd kind of hash it out as I walk along. Now, the topic of the day is CB radio versus ham radio, sort of. Well, maybe not versus, but anyway, that's what we're going to talk about in a minute. But before I get on with the main topic of the day, just want to ask you guys to let me know down in the comments if you like this style of video or not. Normally I stick to topic-based stuff and kind of heavily edit it. Well, at least cut out all the dead space and stuttering. But this is going to be a raw type video. I'm going to try to keep the editing to a minimum. And you're going to see I'm out of breath a little bit here even already. We'll keep that right in the video, that kind of a thing. So let me know if you like this format. So I wanted to try and make this video positive and not turn into some kind of a rant or sob story because I'm upset or bothered by something in the hobby. There's just too much of that going on right now. So I think what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about why I like CB radio and ask you guys to kind of chime in the comments and let me know your thoughts on CB radio or ham radio or both. And let me know whether you participate in any kind of CB radio activities if you're a licensed ham. And kind of just give me your thoughts and stories on CB radio. Not to get into details, but the whole crux of the situation here is that a ham radio club that I was starting to get affiliated with found out that I do some CB radio stuff and then immediately gave me kind of the cold shoulder and kind of distance themselves from me. And again, I don't want to, make this seem like I'm complaining or ranting or any of that sort of thing, because I'm not that upset about it. I'm more curious about it. I want to know the motivation behind it, because it just never sat well with me, this whole ham radio versus CB radio divide. I don't get it. I guess I understand it a little bit, but I don't fully get it. I think we can kind of look at CB radio and say that it's almost like a gateway drug to ham radio in a way for a lot of us, myself included. I started out on CB radio, learned kind of the basics there, and moved into ham radio and kind of beyond from there. I mean, it's all electronics, it's all radio, it's all cool. And I just don't get the negative feelings towards CB radio. So again, not to dwell on the negative, let's talk about some positive about CB radio, why I enjoy still participating in that hobby alongside of ham radio. So the first thing I like about CB radio, and it's probably similar for a lot of you guys out there that are in the audience, is there's some nostalgia to it. I started messing around with CB radios when I was in high school, right around 1989. My dad came home with a CB radio from Kmart, and some friends actually in my high school class had CBs at that time, and I thought it would be cool to try and contact them. But the way things worked, I lived quite a bit further away from the center of town where those guys lived than this modest, mobile CB radio and mag mount on the roof of the house could manage. So we couldn't hear each other. But I had another friend in the next town over who was closer, and we were able to start talking, and we found out that there were other people in the other town that was closer that were also on the air. So, we started talking. I had, a group of friends that I could talk to, and I didn't even have to leave the house because I didn't have my license yet. So in a way, just like everybody likes to say, it was kind of the precursor to social media. It was kind of like being on Facebook or a chat room or something. And we had a lot of fun with it all through high school. And even after I got my license and got into college, I'd still keep the CB radio on and talk to my buddies around town. And we had a lot of fun with it. So every now and then, I like to pull out an old CB radio and kind of, I don't want to say relive those days, but I guess relive those days and those memories and and kind of tinker around with it. Another reason I like CB radios is because they're cheap. Nowadays you can go to a ham fest or a flea market or a yard sale. We call those tag sales here in Connecticut, but same idea. You can go pick up an old CB radio that somebody had in their garage, you know, 5, 10, maybe 15 bucks. And you can bring it home and kind of play around with it and get it working and learn a little bit about how the radio works if you're new to it. Or even if you're not, like me, just some of these old radios are just kind of cool. And, you know, if I go through an old radio and I find that, it doesn't work at all, or I mess it up somehow because I'm, learning how circuits work or something like that, trying to repair something, I don't feel too bad about it because I didn't spend that much money on it. And a lot of these radios, they made millions of them, so there'll be another one at the next yard sale. So really the point that I'm trying to make is if you're interested in electronics and you're a tinkerer like me, it's a great way to, satisfy and scratch that itch, so to speak. Get a cheap radio and kind of mess around with it and, either have fun getting it working or learn from some mistake that you made, blowing it up or whatever. Now, that's not to say that I'm advocating that you necessarily go buy a radio and get in there and add extra channels and boost up the power and that kind of a thing. But there's something to be said for going through that process and learning how it works, learning how a PLL chip works, learning how a limiter circuit works, whether you're modifying it to make it louder or transmit on some frequency that it's not supposed to, which again, I'm not advocating, but people do it and they learn from the process. Now, I'm not trying to come off as a goody two-shoes or anything here, because I really don't care one way or the other what anybody does with a CB radio. But when I get them, I like to put them back to kind of stock form. If somebody's put extra channels in it, I try and take the channels out, that kind of a thing. And that's sort of the same thing learning-wise, but in the opposite direction. And I'm not doing it to, like I said, be a goody two-shoes or anything like that. It more comes from the spirit of the guys that restore like 1970 Hemi Challengers, numbers matching, and they try and go through and put all the exact scratches that the assembly line put in the frame, or that kind of a thing. It comes from that spirit where I'm trying to put the radio back to the way it was right when it was new, mostly because I'm not capable of restoring a Hemi Challenger. So the closest thing I can manage is an old CB radio. So that dovetails nicely into the next point that I was going to make, and that is just the overall design of the CB radios. Right from the 60s right up through the 80s and maybe even into the early 90s, CB radios just had a little bit of a touch of design that other types of radios didn't have, because CB radios were marketed towards consumers. So they had to be a little bit flashier and look a little bit nicer than your average utilitarian, ham radio or land mobile radio or something like that. Especially some of those old base station radios from the late 70s when the CB craze was really hitting its peak. There were some really neat designs back then. The brushed nickel or brushed aluminum faces, big signal meters, wood cases, or well, simulated wood probably in most cases, but you get the idea. They just looked really cool. And even the mobile radios, there was some chrome on there to kind of match the interior of a lot of the cars at the time that were all trimmed out with chrome, and just a really cool, nostalgic looking type of radio, as opposed to ham radios or land mobile radios or, those kinds of things, which were just, communication boxes meant to be put, in a fire truck or a boat or, even a ham radio just needed to be functional. It didn't need to be pretty. Whereas the CB radios, well, they had to have a little pizzazz to kind of sell them to the general public that may not otherwise be interested in radio. And I think that's part of the reason why CB radio caught on, is because the physical design of these things was just cool and fit the time. And a lot of these radios wouldn't look out of place, on an end table in a living room or under the dash of an old car. So finding these old radios under a table at a flea market or something like that and bringing them back and trying to bring them back to kind of what they were when they were new is just fun for me. I just enjoy that. So the next point comes from, I guess I'll call sort of like a prepper perspective, even though I'm not a prepper, but it is good to be prepared, especially with communications, just in case. And I'm not talking about end of the world situations. I'm just talking about local, disruptions in services, maybe due to a snowstorm or something like that. Pretty much anybody can go down to the store or go on Amazon or some website and buy a CB radio, set it up in their house, and just have it ready, just in case, the power goes out or something like that. You can still communicate with your neighbors and, figure out what you can and can't do. Just having a radio in your possession that you can use in an emergency, either in your car or with some kind of battery set up in your house, and checking it periodically, kind of like you would a smoke alarm, is a good idea. And that's where people like me sort of come in, and maybe you, where if you're a CB radio operator and a ham, you can help pass information from the local community of, non-hams to sort of the ham network and get information in and out of an area that's otherwise grid down. Another point that I want to make is that there's a lot of good people on CB radio that just aren't hams. And, some of these guys are technically minded and they're just not interested in getting a license for whatever reason. And I'd like to encourage those of you who have considered getting your ham license to take another look at it. Don't get discouraged by the same thing that happened to me, where you've got some ham radio person telling you that CB is somehow inferior, because it's not. Now, there's also a lot of like fire and EMS type people that know about radio because of their training, but they're not really interested in getting a ham license. They see radio as a tool, more than a hobby, really. But they may have CBs, in their vehicles or even in their house as part of their EMS services. And every now and then you might hear one of those guys chatting and get into a conversation, and they're great people to know, because they're usually the ones with their finger on the pulse of the community. They know what's going on around town, not only just what's happening during emergencies, but just day-to-day planning, that kind of a thing. They're boots on the ground and kind of the liaisons between sort of the public in some cases and, the administration of a town. And those are really good guys to get to know. And you might not get to know them unless you hear them on the CB radio. So there's probably a ton more points I could make on this topic, but I'll hold it there so the video doesn't get too long. So let's get a discussion going in the comments. Let me know what you think about CB or ham, or how they interact with each other, down in the comments. And let's try to keep everything civil. If it gets too out of hand, I'll remove those comments. But for the most part, I'm going to leave everything be, and let's see where the discussion takes us. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to learn more about my channel, check the description below. Thanks for watching.